People often wonder why, especially on this channel, we like to look at things like Conservative Home, or even in some cases, I would sometimes go out of my way to try and find sort of think pieces written by sort of Conservative MPs, or in this case, as we're going to go over today, a former Conservative MP. Because it is really important sometimes to look at your sort of competition, or in this case, the Conservative Party, and just look at it in what it is trying to do and what it is trying to achieve. Because if you are ever really to come up with a proper plan, a strategy, or anything like that to be able to take on sort of the organization of the sort of Conservative Party, to some extent, you have to know what is going on internally and what their internal thinking is. And Brexit absolutely has, well, it shattered, shall we say, the once almost very rigid image that the Conservative Party was this one monolith, that it would be traveling constantly in one direction, maybe with, a couple of, cracks here or there, a bit of fault lines, but nothing, nothing too serious, nothing, a bit of repair couldn't be done to fix those cracks. However, Brexit didn't just take a hammer to it. It took an absolute, jackhammer to it and completely smashed the structure. And this is why we always talk about the Conservative Party being so fractured. So that is why I go on and go to these sort of places to see just what the thinking is in the party, to see where they're going and what their thoughts are, and eventually what direction of travel they may go in. But interesting today, because we're going to go have a look at a piece that David Gauck wrote for the New Statesman, because he has a very interesting take that certainly we've alluded to in the past, that Brexit could certainly be an interesting turning point in the life of the Conservative Party. But of course, you've got to remember the Conservative Party is one of the most, if not successful, of political organizations in the history of the world, and has been very, very long surviving because it has had the ability to change. And a lot of people are now sort of questioning that ability. Can the Conservative Party actually deal with these internal fissions that Brexit has created? And certainly, what we're going to hear today, the former MP here certainly does not think the Conservative Party can do that. So, before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, do remember to ring the bell as well. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and an affiliation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. And if you do sign up to either the Patreon or the Pony Club, there is again, I'm making a weekly content video for all the people who sign up to that and support me that way. So like I say, once you sign up to those, you will have access to a load of extra content that I've made specifically for those channels. So as always, guys, let's crack on with this then. So this comes from the New Statesman with the title of "Brexit is Slowly Killing the Conservative Party." Did you enjoy Brexit Day? Not so much. You weren't alone. Tuesday was the 3rd anniversary of the UK leaving the European Union. Naturally, of those who thought that Brexit would be a mistake have been quick to point out that Brexit is proving to be a mistake, aided by the International Monetary Fund's assessment that the UK is on the verge of becoming the only major economy to shrink in 2023. And bear in mind, you've only got to look at Russia. It's got all those sanctions against it, and yet even potentially that might have more growth. Not a lot of growth, mind you. It's still going to be in the negative. Certainly more growth than us. How long can certainly the British government, even the Conservative Party, ignore, outside economic assessments from the IMF when it comes to this? Ignoring these is insane. but that's what some of these Brexiteers are still just, we are following our ideology, like we commented yesterday with, Liz Truss and her, a wizard did it speech. Yeah, it's going to get, I think, even more crazy. So the more interesting response has come from those who supported Brexit and saw our departure from the EU on the 31st of January as 2021 as a moment of celebration. Yes, the familiar voices, Johnson, Frost, Hannan, Rees-Mogg, etc., have all been on the airwaves, but it is striking how downbeat and defensive they have become. There was plentiful evidence of, if there was plentiful evidence of Brexit being a success, we can be sure it would be shouted from the rooftops. And I've said that before throughout all this. If Brexit was a success, even if there was like the most miniature of successes, Johnson, Frost, Hannan, Rees-Mogg would be shouting it from the rooftops. They absolutely would. We would be hearing about the exciting new trade deals signed, the unpopular and burdensome regulations that have been removed, the tech sectors that have boomed and become our new regulatory agility, the extra money poured into the NHS as a consequence of ending our EU contributions, and of course, the higher real wage UK for UK workers now that EU immigration was controlled. Instead, the Brexiteers, the Brexiteers are all on the back foot. All our problems stem from COVID, or to be precise, our overly stringent lockdowns and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they say. Anyway, we haven't taken advantage of our new freedoms because ministers and civil servants have been too timid to diverge from the EU. That must be it. We've not even properly Brexited yet, even if nearly everyone making this complaint supported the withdrawal agreement in 2019 and the UK-EU trade deal in 2020, and in case of David Frost, negotiated both. That's very true. It's always so funny when you hear Frost complaining about the very deal he helped not only supported, but negotiate. Again, it will be one of Brexit's great ironies, and always will be. The man complaining about the very thing he negotiated, but there you go. So Brexit, like communism, has never been properly tried. If you backed Brexit but are explaining why it is not working yet, you are losing. And an examination of the polls show that the Brexiteers are losing the argument. In 629 out of over 632 British constituencies, those who regret Brexit outnumbered those who did not. And according to the polls published by Unheard, in 2 out of 3 remaining, it's a tie. All this creates a dilemma for Rishi Sunak as to what his political strategy should be. In 2019, the Conservative victory was based on stopping Jeremy Corbyn and getting Brexit done. With Corbyn finished, the Tories might be expected to lean heavily on Brexit issue to try and shore up the red wall. But that does not appear to be a vote winner it once was, especially in working class communities. The choice for the Conservatives is either to move on and say as little as possible about the topic, or to double down and try to re-win the argument. And I think both of these strategies are eventually going to end up losing them, because the red wall has now really once again turned back on the Conservatives. There were, a lot in 2019. Many of these red wall Conservative MPs were saying, vote me in and you will see an amazing transformation. It's because, you've always had this, Labour MP. They've been absolutely awful. They've been terrible. Well, guess what? They've put you in. You haven't improved, these working class areas and their constituents' lot in life. In fact, you've made them actively worse in many cases. Not only that, they haven't delivered on their promises to level up or anything else. So this red wall, and hence even now, we are still calling it red wall constituencies just goes to show you how much they have failed to really cement any support in these constituents. So, on the evidence of this week, Sunak appears to be leaning towards the former. He did produce a Twitter thread celebrating the anniversary, but there was a sense that he was phoning it in. The government otherwise did very little to highlight the occasion and did not even put up a minister, for example, for the Newsnight debate on the subject. At the same time, unsurprisingly, Boris Johnson chose to lean in to the argument, boasting about the vaccine rollout, the one that happened while we were still obliged to comply with the EU rules, and of course, looked forward to, quote, unspecified benefits to come. It is nonsense, of course, but as is often the case, Sunak lacks the political strength to even repudiate the Johnson position or even the shamelessness to try and replicate it. The pro-Brexit arguments are very thin, but there is a short-term tactical argument that unless it can be revived as a positive reason for voting Tory, the Conservatives cannot win the next election. But there is also a longer-term strategic question, which whether the Tories' continued commitment to a hard Brexit will make the party unelectable. And this is what is going to be the interesting point going forward, really, from now on. He's got an absolute good point here, because hard Brexit is all about deregulation, getting the government out of sort of the market, again, smaller government, lower taxes, this Singapore on the Thames style. This was what Liz Truss was trying to do. This is what she was trying to, quote, turbocharge and put rocket boots underneath the economy. Again, that was her own words of a speechwriter, what she said she was trying to do. We've seen that, and we've seen how bad it took. And not only that, there are other things potentially that are going to sort of be really hard to, as we said, cement this sort of victory, this establishment into getting the red wall to vote Conservative again. It's going to be hard to really get them to continue on that commitment, because I don't see how they do it, especially when their own party is very divided about how hard a Brexit they should really be doing. Even now with the EU reform bill, EU rules and retained EU law bill, should we say it, that very much did split the Conservative Party along very ideological lines. Some voted for it very begrudgingly, but we'll see what happens when it gets to the Lords. So, the anti-Brexit mood is more acute among younger voters, where even the majority the minority who supported Leave are changing their minds faster than all the voters. And according to a report by UK in a Changing Europe, if this continues, voter replacement, this is the euphemism for younger voters joining the electoral roll and older voters dying, will move public opinion even further towards a pro-EU position by the time we get to a general election in 2028 or even 2029. If the Tories lose next time, as it seems very likely, they will have to go through a period of modernization in which unpopular policies are dropped and the party has to demonstrate it has changed. Now, that's what David Cameron had to do. David Cameron had to really change the policy, and he was hated by a lot of people in the Conservative Party, even though he dragged the party more to the center for them to be able to win. And of course, he has hated it. And much of the reaction, especially we've seen from the Brexiteers and other Conservatives, has very much been the anti-Cameron forces. But Cameron dragged the party and tried to modernize it. He got rid of the whole nasty party image that the Conservative Party had at that time. And, let's, give credit where credit is due. Cameron did succeed in that regard. And yet it's shocking that they can't even realize that you've got people like Carruthers, who is actively trying to create a group of the Conservative Democratic organization that wants to drag the party even more back to the right and undo a lot of this Cameron era changes. So this is going to cause even more trouble in the party and even make it harder, as he says, rightly points out, to get more people as more of these sort of voters join the roll and sort of the older voters, well, die. It's going to be more difficult to attract them. So back to it. So to win in the late 2020s or even 2030s, a more pragmatic approach to the EU will be necessary. Such a modernization will be infinitely harder to do than anything attempted by David Cameron after 2005. As we said, it will be absolutely infinitely harder. People forget Cameron changed the Conservative Party because he had to. But it's going to be, he's right, it's going to be infinitely harder. So since 2019, the Conservatives have defined themselves as the party of hard Brexit. They may again be tempted to do so in 2024. This will not be straightforward, even in the short term, but in the long term, it is a political dead end. The Conservative Party longevity and success has depended upon its ability to transform and reflect changing times. It has, at different points, been a Europhile and Eurosceptic, protectionist and liberal, isolationist and interventionist. To appeal to an electorate that has concluded that hard Brexit and maybe Brexit altogether has failed may prove to be transformational too far. So that is an interesting question. It's sort of very, very looking at long-term political and economic trend, long-term political economic trends, certainly how Brexit is going to be viewed. And as we've seen, minority young people who voted for Brexit have changed their minds a lot faster. And as more young people come into sort of the voter rolls, they're a lot more pro-European than the older people who have either changed their minds or not changed their minds. And in many cases, they're, slowly starting to die off. And as it looks like, Conservatives will lose the next general election, be it either this year or potentially in 2 years' time, in 2025. Going forward, looking 10, 20 years ahead, unless the Conservative Party seriously actually drops pushing for a hard Brexit, it's very difficult to see how they attract these new voters coming into the role. It's very, very difficult to see. I'll tell you that now. And I think he is right. On one point, it is, he describes it as the slow killing. I would more describe it as a slow puncture. I think that's more accurate because the Conservative Party has shown in the past it can change. But can it change this time? And of course, can it change its mind on the core question of Brexit? If it can certainly, seal that puncture up. But if it can't, well, eventually you're going to have a Conservative Party that is forever running on a flat tire. And sooner or later, that flat tire isn't going to last. And that's when it will truly be a slow death. But we'll have to see. Like I say, this is a long-term, very much prediction in this case. But yeah, I certainly agree with him on all the points he made. Certainly information there. Very much agree on those points. But yeah, this is something we're going to have to see what happens. And certainly we're also going to have to see what Labour changes in this regard, because as we've said, we talked about before, I think pushing for more closer alignment makes sense. And then eventually you just go, well, why aren't we in the customs union? Why aren't we in the single market? And then after that, why aren't we in the EU? So we're on the path back to rejoining, whether it be, certainly 5, 10, 15 years potentially Who knows? I think the direction we're going on is going to happen a lot quicker. That process, absolutely. So, as always, thank you very much for joining me. Please always do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, and of course the YouTube thank you button, and of course the Pony Club down below as well. And as always, thank you very much for joining. Please remember to ring the bell on your way out as well. And of course, I'll see you all next time.